Nutrition Step 2. Dietary change by the environmental model by 72 hours of immersion without sugar and starch. And the philosophy and value of not dieting, but changing your diet to a healthy diet. Understanding the culprit of much of disease, the de novo fatty acids made from starch, low on fat-soluble antioxidants, learning about your sugars, their sources, and how to avoid them. This is Mark Lorenzato, MD, for PaleoLegacy.com. Modifying environment is a sure way to promote change. We can note what's purchased, what are we buying, what are we consuming, how are we preparing it. Our agenda as culture and as society, and even individually, is really what counts. We can start listing what we support, what we want to do. We can learn the models and their limitations. As we learn them, we live them, benefit, and we teach them. We can engineer balanced menus using a paleo model, avoiding starch and sugar, limiting sodium and inorganic phosphate and refined oils, and supplementing as needed. We can think of the integrative model of medicine that suggests we should incorporate molecules that inhibit the progression of cancers. We can look at the nutrigenomics model, which looks at which vitamins do damage to our DNA and which vitamins promote repair of DNA. We can look and see from the paleo perspective what range meat has in it, and therefore what game meat used to have in it, and understand better how we need to supplement it for vegetarian, or if we're just lacking game meat and range meat. When you commit to avoiding sugar, starches, and alcohol for 72 hours, if you're like most individuals, your cravings will stop. Up until that point, you will want sugar, you will want starch, you may want alcohol. The common of these things is that they get converted de novo to fatty acids, particularly palmitic acid and myricic acid in our system. Mostly this 18-carbon palmitic acid probably causes a craving process. If you have an underlying disease such as insulin resistance, severe obesity, you'll probably benefit from measuring your glucose very regularly as you undergo a 72-hour immersion. Glucometers are inexpensive. The money is made on the test strips, so having one, there's really no excuse. If it's hard to prick yourself, work with your practitioner until you learn the skill. Preparing your own food environment for those 72 hours, you can have things you won't normally have later on a regular basis. The saturated fatty acids, saturated fats from fatty acids, such as cheeses. Go ahead those 72 hours, whatever it takes to get past that craving of starch. After 72 hours of being free of starch and sugar, you'll probably feel you've lost your craving. And so long as you don't have another meal more than every 36 hours apart, with sugar and starch and alcohol in it, you'll do fine. If you have consecutive meals, by the third meal you'll be craving. Sugar and starch, skip 36 hours, another third sugar and starch, you're fine. It's human to regress. So you do have sugar and starch, and the next meal sugar and starch, and then you're craving and you're back on it. Accept that, you'll learn that it's painful to have to go through this immersion process and do with your craving. So after a while, you'll just stay away from that sugar and starch for 36 hours. After finishing the immersion 72 period, even if you regress intermittently, balancing your diet is best done with physical activity, with exercise. This will keep you honest about your eating. You can concentrate on eating well and some exercise, and you can forget about worrying about weight. It will take care of itself. I mentioned the major culprit in our society dietary problem now is the starch that gets converted into de novo fatty acids. As we flood our liver with starch, 30 minutes after eating it, if starch is cooked, it will flood the liver as glucose. This glucose can only fill up our glycogen reserves, our sugar reserves, so much, after which, and at the same time in a flood, we start making fatty acids. And these fatty acids are packaged, but if we're not getting fat-soluble antioxidants and fat-soluble vitamins at the same time, and the fats are actually absorbed through another process, it doesn't seem likely that we'll package these with a good balance. Therefore, in general, people that overeat starch have depletion of fat-soluble antioxidants and vitamin in their lipoproteins and therefore in their cells. The most common de novo fatty acids are myristic and palmitic. These are 16 and 18 saturated fatty acids. These are also found in palm kernel oil, coconut oil, and butter. And all these three contribute to atherosclerotic disease significantly if they're out of balance, which most frequently they are, unfortunately. Nature mostly supplies these fat-soluble antioxidants and vitamins in foods other than the de novo fatty acids. Higher risk of cardiovascular disease is accompanied with higher risk of neurodegenerative disease, cancers, and other diseases. In the era of information, it's much easier to understand carbohydrates and sugars. Starches are found in rice, brown rice, flour, whole wheat flour, other cereals, potatoes, corn, tapioca, and many more. I look at Wikipedia to illustrate this, and I use this as a tool. You can always look at the total carbohydrates and at the fiber and at the sugar content. Mostly, the total carbohydrates minus the fiber is equal to either starch or sugar, both of which, as I've said, is glucose. There are other polymers of sugars and there are other sugars, so this may not be exact, but it's a good ballpark. As we see here for quinoa, of 100 grams, 64 grams are carbohydrate, 52 grams are starch, only 7 grams of fiber. So the 7 from the 64 is 57. There's 5 grams in there maybe of sugar. Who knows? You get the idea. Knowing where sugar comes from is a little difficult. It's under many names. You can read the labels. You suspect that it's being used in liberal dosage in restaurants. And molecules that are like sugar or sugar include oligosaccharides. There's just a few sugar molecules hooked together, 3 to 10s general, maybe more. Monosaccharides, one sugar molecule, disaccharides are 2. Maltose, maltodextrin. Maltose is a disaccharide, glucose, and maltodextrin's longer. Fructose, fructose corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, which is different than fructose corn syrup or corn syrup. And dextrose, which is D-glucose, fructose, and galactose. As I mentioned, those are all ones that are absorbed very rapidly in the small intestine, those last 3. In conclusion, change is fueled by change in environment, and we can be the architect of our healthy environment. When we purchase food, we bring them home, and we make our environment. So purchase the foods that are healthy for you. It takes about 72 hours to withdraw from sugar addiction. You may regress, but you can come out of it again until you learn it's not worth it. Alcohol and sugar both may be addictive through de novo fatty acid production of the fatty acid palmitic acid. Either way, palmitic acid is considered not beneficial for us because it fuels atherosclerotic disease in the amounts people get it these days. Small amounts, not bad. You should know your sugars the best you can to avoid overindulgence in them. There's generally no reason to have a lot of sugar in the morning when you're replenishing your glycogen stores after a fast. You can get a little bit more than you could after a meal. You don't want to have a carbohydrate meal followed by a sugar dessert by any means. I hope this helped. We'll go on to understanding using lists to eat better.